Winter rolled in slow quiet and silver gray. Frost clung to the fence rails, and the mornings began with the crunch of frozen earth under boots. The Bennett ranch was alive and strong again, rebuilt, renewed, thriving. And yet, something new stirred in the air, a whisper that change was coming. It arrived one cold morning in the form of a letter. Lila found it tucked beneath a stack of supply orders on the porch, sealed with wax and stamped with the emblem of the Abilene School for the Deaf and Mute. Her fingers trembled as she traced the seal. She looked up, the winter sun blinding on the snow, and then turned the envelope over. It was addressed to Mrs. Lila Bennett. For a long moment, she just stared at it, her name written bold and clear, as though the world itself had decided to speak to her. Inside the kitchen, Cole was fixing the fire. The smell of coffee filled the room as he looked up and smiled. "Mornin', sweetheart. You got frost on your hair again." She smiled faintly and handed him the letter. He wiped his hands and read the seal, his brow furrowing. "Abilene School." "What's this?" She motioned for him to read. He broke the seal carefully and began to read aloud, his voice steady, though his eyes softened with each line. "To Mrs. Lila Bennett, word of your work has reached our school through a traveling merchant and several local families. We hear you have taught deaf children on your ranch, and that your signs have given them new ways to speak and live. We invite you to join us in Abilene as a teacher, to help start a new program for rural families who have no place for their children to learn. Your experience and courage could change many lives. If you accept, please come before the spring thaw. We will provide room, board, and full support. Respectfully, Mary Wilkins, headmistress." When Cole finished, the only sound left was the low crackle of the fire. Lila stood still, eyes downcast, the letter trembling in her hands. She didn't need to hear the words again, she felt them. Each one was a door, opening into a world she had never dreamed she'd be invited into. A world where children like Samuel, like her younger self, would never feel alone again. Cole set the letter down gently. "That's a mighty offer," he said slowly. "You'd be changing lives, Lila." She nodded, her lips pressed tight. "It's everything I ever hoped for," she signed, her fingers hesitant. Then her hands stilled. "But," he waited, her eyes lifted to meet his. "It means leaving here, leaving you." Cole took a deep breath, his jaw tightening. He looked away for a moment, then back at her. "Maybe it don't have to mean that," he said softly. "Maybe we could both go. Start again somewhere new." Lila shook her head slowly. "This ranch is your father's legacy, your home. Your men need you here." He smiled faintly, though his eyes betrayed the ache behind it. "Home's wherever you are." Her hands trembled as she signed, "I love you, Cole." "I know." He reached out, brushing his thumb across her cheek. "I knew it the moment you looked me in the eye and didn't flinch at who I was. And I reckon I'll love you till my last breath." She pressed her forehead to his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart, the one thing that always anchored her. But in that moment, she knew something else too. Love wasn't just holding on. Sometimes love was letting go, if it meant helping others find their voice. That evening, she wrote back to Abilene. Her handwriting was careful, graceful. "To Mrs. Wilkins, I would be honored to teach, but I will need time to prepare to say goodbye, to ensure my home and heart are both in good hands. I accept. With gratitude, Lila Bennett." When she sealed the envelope, she sat in silence for a long while, the kind that wasn't empty, but full of everything she couldn't say aloud. Cole came up behind her, resting his hands on her shoulders. "When spring comes," he said quietly, "I'll take you there myself." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. Outside, the wind rose softly across the plains, catching the last warmth of the setting sun. It carried her name and her promise, far beyond the ranch, toward a future that was calling her home in a different way. The letter in the wind was not an ending. It was the beginning of a new song, one only hearts like hers could hear. Spring came early that year. The Texas hills woke up in soft shades of green, and the wildflowers spilled like spilled paint along the dusty trails. The sky stretched wide and endless, and a canvas of promise and ache. For weeks, Lila packed quietly, her books, her teaching notes, and a few keepsakes from the ranch. Every item she wrapped felt like a small goodbye. Cole watched her from the doorway most mornings, his hat in his hands, saying nothing. Words seemed too fragile for what hung between them, but when the last frost melted, he saddled the wagon himself. 2 horses stood ready, the same pair that had carried them through fire and storm. It was time. The morning she left, the ranch gathered to see her off. Martha hugged her tight, whispering blessings and dabbing at her eyes with her apron. The ranch hands lined up quietly, hats off, heads bowed, each of them holding the kind of respect Lila had earned with her courage, not her words. Little Samuel clung to her waist. His hands moved shakily as he signed, "Don't go." Lila knelt and took his hands gently. "I have to," she signed back. "So more children like you can learn." The boy's lip trembled. "Will you come back?" She smiled softly. "Always." She pressed something into his palm. Her old silver hairpin, the one she'd worn the night of the fire. "For courage," she mouthed. Then, with one last look at the ranch and her home, her heart, her beginning, she climbed onto the wagon beside Cole. The wheels creaked, the horses started forward, and the Bennett ranch slowly faded behind them. The journey to Abilene took 2 days. They rode through fields where bluebonnets bent in the breeze, through valleys where streams whispered over stone. Sometimes they talked, other times they didn't need to. Cole would point out a hawk circling overhead and Lila would smile. She'd sign a word, and he'd repeat it with a grin, sometimes clumsy, sometimes perfect. At night, they camped beneath the stars. The firelight danced on Lila's face as she traced letters in the dirt. Hope, home, heart. Cole watched, his voice low. "You've changed this place, Lila, changed me." She looked up, her hands still. "You listened," she signed. He smiled faintly. That was the easy part. She leaned closer, resting her head against his shoulder. Together they watched the flames flicker, each one a memory, a heartbeat, a promise. By the second dawn, Abilene appeared on the horizon, the small schoolhouse rising like a beacon beyond the hills. The moment they saw it, silence filled the wagon, a silence not of distance but of understanding. At the school gate, children were already waiting, boys and girls who signed to each other with quick, joyful hands. The headmistress, Mrs. Wilkins, came forward to greet them. "You must be Mrs. Bennett," she said warmly. "Welcome home." Home. The word struck Lila deep, echoing through her chest. She turned to Cole, her eyes bright, her lips trembling with everything she wanted to say but couldn't. He dismounted first, then helped her down, holding her hand longer than needed. "Well," he said quietly, "looks like the world's been waiting on you." Her hands moved slowly. "I'll miss you every day." Cole's jaw worked as he nodded. "And I'll be counting the sunsets till you come back." She smiled through her tears. "Promise?" He took her hand, pressed it to his heart. "Promise." Then, as the children watched, he leaned in and kissed her one last time. Slow, tender, and sure. The kind of kiss that spoke louder than words, carried deeper than sound. When he pulled away, he climbed back onto the wagon, tipping his hat. "Go make the world listen, Mrs. Bennett." She stood there as the wagon rolled away, the wind tugging at her dress, her hair shining in the sunlight, and as the horizon swallowed him, Lila lifted her hand high in the air and signed the word she'd taught to so many: love. That evening, as the school bells rang across Abilene, Lila began her first lesson. Dozens of small hands followed her movements, A, B, C, and in that moment she realized something beautiful. Even silence has an echo, and hers would travel farther than any sound could ever reach. Back at the Bennett ranch, as the sun dipped below the hills, Cole looked to the wind, touched the locket she'd left behind, and whispered, "She is better than all of us." The end. Morning came slow and gray over the Bennett ranch. Smoke still curled from the blackened bones of the barn, twisting upward like ghosts of what had been. The air carried the bitter scent of ash, a smell that clung to skin, hair, and memory. The fire had taken much, half the hay, 3 horses, and a lifetime of work gone up in a single night. But it hadn't taken them, and for Cole Bennett, that was all that mattered. Lila sat on the porch steps, wrapped in one of Martha's quilts. Her face was smudged with soot, her eyes red from exhaustion, but her back was straight, unbroken. The morning wind brushed strands of gold hair across her face as she watched the men work, hauling buckets, clearing debris, murmuring in low voices. For the first time, those murmurs weren't laced with doubt or pity. They were words of reverence. "She's something else," one of the men whispered. "Never seen anyone that brave," said another. Lila didn't need to hear them to feel their change. Respect hummed in the air like the faint vibration of thunder before rain. Cole came out of the ruins, his shirt rolled to his elbows, soot streaked across his face. He caught her watching him and smiled tiredly. She signed. "You should rest." He shook his head, replying slowly so she could read his lips. "Can't rest till the horses are safe. Till you're safe." Her eyes softened, and she motioned toward the smoldering remains of the barn. "I'm safe. We both are. That's enough." He crouched in front of her, the weight of days showing in his eyes. "It'll never be enough. You risked your life again because of me. Because of this land." She touched his cheek gently, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "Because it's home." Cole swallowed hard. "Home," he repeated quietly. "That's what I was hoping you'd call it." For days, the ranch worked to rebuild. Men from neighboring spreads rode in to lend a hand, bringing wood, nails, and stories of how the deaf woman from Bennett Ranch had stood in the fire. Lila became a legend before she even knew it. Children from nearby towns came just to see her, the lady who couldn't hear thunder but had faced it anyway. Some brought her wildflowers, others shyly tried the signs she'd taught Luke's sister. Lila smiled and taught them a new one: hope. One evening, when the new barn walls were halfway raised, Cole found her standing by the corral. The sunset spilled over her like rose-colored dust, warm and soft. He walked up quietly, holding something behind his back. When she turned, he smiled faintly. "Close your eyes," he said. She hesitated, then obeyed. He placed something cool and light in her hands. When she opened her eyes, she saw it. A silver locket on a thin chain, etched with the shape of a small wildflower. Inside, one word was engraved: forever. Her breath caught. He took her hands, speaking slowly so she could see. "I had this made in Abilene before the fire. Was waiting for the right time to give it to you." She looked up at him, eyes wide, trembling. "Why?" He smiled softly, though his voice wavered. "Because I've been half a man my whole life, loud, stubborn, sure the world had to move to my noise. Then you came here and showed me what real strength sounds like. You don't need words to make people listen, Lila. You just are." Tears welled in her eyes. Her fingers moved slowly, shakily. "I thought you might never say it." He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Then let me say it right." He pressed his forehead to hers, his voice low and sure. "I love you, Lila Bennett." She inhaled sharply, her heart hammering. For a moment, everything around them, the rebuilding, the pain, the fire's memory, faded into quiet. Then she signed, one word that needed no sound: always. He kissed her then, gentle, certain, full of promise. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of smoke and sage. The last light of day wrapped around them like gold thread, binding the ashes to the dawn. That night, the ranch finally rested. The men gathered around the fire, laughing again. Martha hummed softly as she sewed new curtains. And inside the little farmhouse, Cole and Lila sat side by side, her head on his shoulder, the silver locket catching the glow of the hearth. No one laughed at the deaf bride anymore. Now they told her story, in whispers, in reverence, in awe. Autumn painted the Bennett Ranch in hues of gold and rust. The fields, once charred by flame, now swayed with new grass. The horses ran free again, their manes flashing in the sunlight. And in the heart of it all, Lila Bennett moved with quiet grace, like the calm after a long storm. The laughter that once mocked her had turned into music that welcomed her. Where once she stood apart, now she led. Every morning, Lila and Cole worked side by side, mending fences, tending to horses, planting winter feed. He learned her rhythm, and she learned his patience. They didn't always need words anymore. A look, a touch, a soft smile, that was enough. But Lila had started something that reached far beyond their land. It began the day a dusty wagon rolled up to their gate. A man stepped down, gray-bearded, hat in hand, with a boy no older than 10 by his side. The child clung to his father's sleeve, eyes wide but distant. Cole met them halfway down the path. "Mornin'. Can I help you, friend?" The man shifted awkwardly. "Name's Harris. I got word from the folks in town about your wife. Said she's deaf, but she speaks with her hands." Cole nodded, understanding dawning. He glanced at Lila, who stood on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes softened when she saw the boy. Harris hesitated, voice rough with shame. "My boy, Samuel, he hasn't spoken since birth. Can't hear nothing. The school in Abilene says there's no place for him. They told me to just make him work the land and forget books." He looked down, his voice breaking. "But I can't. He deserves more than silence." Cole turned to Lila. She'd already begun walking toward them, her steps slow, deliberate. She knelt in front of the boy and smiled. Not the pitying kind, but warm, full of light. Then she pointed to herself, Lila, then to him, raising her brows in question. The boy hesitated, then signed clumsily with his fingers. "Samuel." Lila's smile widened. She clapped softly, a gesture of praise, and began to teach him another sign. "Friend." Samuel repeated it shyly at first, then with a spark in his eyes. For the next week, the ranch took on a new rhythm. When Cole was out on the range, Lila spent her mornings under the oak tree with Samuel, teaching him signs using sticks, stones, and laughter. The boy's hands grew more confident each day, shaping meaning out of motion, finding a language he never knew he could own. Sometimes other children from nearby ranches came to watch. Lila welcomed them all, showing them how to say thank you, please, and love. Within a month, the Bennett Ranch had become something no one expected: a school, a refuge, a place where silence had its own melody. One evening, as the sun set in streaks of rose and copper, Harris approached Cole by the corral. "Never seen my boy smile like that," he said quietly. "Your wife?" She gave him something I thought the world had taken away. Cole nodded, his gaze fixed on Lila and Samuel laughing beneath the oak. "She gives that to everyone," he said softly. "Even me." The older man swallowed, emotion thick in his voice. "If folks had half her strength, this world would be a gentler place." Cole smiled faintly. "She's teaching us all how to listen, even when there's no sound." That night, Lila sat at the table with her notebook open, sketching signs for new words she wanted to teach Samuel: hope, dream, future. Cole came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her shoulders. She leaned back against him, smiling when his chin brushed her hair. "You're changing the whole valley," he murmured. She turned to look up at him and signed, "Not me, us." He chuckled softly. "Us, huh? Guess I'll take that." She smiled wider and wrote one more word at the bottom of the page: legacy. When she looked up again, her eyes gleamed with quiet determination. If one child learns to speak with his hands, maybe others will too. No one should live unseen. Cole's hand tightened gently around hers. "And no one ever will, not while you're here." Outside, the wind whispered through the grass, a soft, wordless song. And for once, silence didn't feel empty. It felt full, alive with echoes of the heart. The sun climbed high over the Bennett Ranch, burning the last of the morning mist off the fields. The world looked peaceful again, fences mended, horses grazing, laughter echoing faintly from the barn. But peace on the frontier was a fragile thing. It never lasted long. That afternoon, a rider appeared on the dusty road from Abilene. Cole spotted him first. A tall man in a black coat, his hat pulled low, a thin trail of dust rising behind his horse. He rode with the easy swagger of someone used to getting his way. Cole felt a prickle of unease. Strangers didn't often ride this far without reason. The man dismounted near the gate and tipped his hat. Afternoon. Name's Reed Lawson. Heard this ranch could use a few more good hands. Cole studied him. His voice was smooth, but there was a sharpness underneath. The kind of edge you only got from living hard. We've got enough men, Cole said evenly. But I'll hear your story. Lawson smiled thinly. No story, just work. I was driving cattle down Abilene Way till my outfit scattered. Figured I'd try my luck further west. Cole didn't like it. But something in Lawson's steady gaze made it clear. Refusing him might mean trouble. Fine, Cole said at last. You can bunk in the far cabin. We'll see if you can keep up. From the porch, Lila watched the exchange. The newcomer moved with quiet confidence, too quiet. Something about him set her heart beating fast. That evening during supper, she felt his eyes on her more than once. She kept her head down, pretending to focus on her stew, but she could feel his stare. Curious, measuring. When Cole caught Lawson's gaze lingering too long, he spoke sharply. You need something, Reed? Lawson chuckled. Just wondering how a man like you got lucky enough to find a lady like her. The room went still. Even the fire seemed to hush. Cole's jaw tightened. You'll show her respect, he said quietly. Lawson held up his hands. No offense meant, friend. Just making conversation, but his smirk said otherwise. Lila's hands trembled slightly under the table. She signed toward Cole. He's dangerous. Cole caught it, nodded almost imperceptibly. Over the next few days, the stranger worked hard, almost too hard, fixing fences before dawn, breaking wild horses without flinching. The men started to respect him, but Cole didn't trust him. He saw the way Lawson watched everything, the layout of the ranch, the safe in the study, even the routines of the hands. And then there were the questions. Fine herd you've got. Bennett, Lawson would say casually. Guess Abilene buyers pay well for your stock, huh? Or, heard tell you got a silver claim near the ridge, and that true? Cole would brush it off each time, but his gut told him Reed Lawson wasn't there for honest work. One night, as the moon rose pale and cold, Lila couldn't sleep. She stepped out onto the porch, the night air cool on her skin. The ranch lay silent except for the chirp of crickets and the low murmur of wind. Then, movement. A shadow near the barn, her eyes narrowed. Someone was leading out one of the horses. Quiet, deliberate, Lawson. She moved without sound, grabbing a lantern and following him into the dark. The flame flickered low as she slipped behind a stack of barrels. Lawson stopped near the corral, glancing around before pulling something from his coat, a small map. He knelt, checking directions under the moonlight. Her pulse quickened. He wasn't just a drifter, he was planning something. She stepped forward, meaning to warn Cole, but her boot scraped the dirt. Lawson spun instantly, his hand going to his revolver. Who's there? He hissed. Lila froze, the lantern shaking in her grip. Recognition flashed in his eyes. You? He said softly. Didn't think you'd sneak out here, sweetheart. He took a step closer, smirking. Can't hear me, can you? That's real convenient. She backed away slowly, her mind racing. The lantern flame sputtered, threatening to go out. Lawson's voice turned cold. Best go inside and forget what you saw. Before she could move, the barn door burst open. Cole stood there, shotgun leveled. Drop it, Reed. For a long second, nobody breathed. Then Lawson smiled. Didn't mean no harm, Bennett. Just looking for the tack room. Cole's eyes didn't waver. At midnight? With a map? Lawson's smirk faded. The truth was out. Lila stepped beside Cole, her small frame steady as iron. She didn't need to hear the words. She could see the danger written in every movement of the stranger's hands. The night wind rose, cold and whispering, carrying the scent of rain again. Cole's finger tightened on the trigger. You've got till dawn to be gone, he said. If I see you again, you won't ride away this easy. Lawson stared at them both, hatred flickering in his eyes, then spat into the dirt. You'll regret this, Bennett. He swung into his saddle and rode off into the darkness, the echo of hooves fading into the hills. Lila stood beside Cole, trembling slightly, the lantern flickering between them. He turned to her, touched her cheek gently, and mouthed, You were brave. She signed back, I wasn't afraid. Only for you. Cole smiled faintly. Guess the wind brought us another storm. And somewhere out in the dark, that storm was already gathering. The Bennett ranch slept under a blanket of stillness. The moon hung pale and high, the field silver in its glow. Only the faint hum of crickets filled the air, whispering through the grass. Inside the farmhouse, the lanterns were dim. Cole slept light, as ranchers often do, half listening to the creak of wood, the wind brushing the shutters, the slow rhythm of the night. Lila lay beside him, her head resting on his shoulder, one hand over his heart. It was a peace she had fought for, and for a few quiet weeks, it felt like it might last, but peace doesn't last long on the frontier. Out in the darkness, a figure moved among the barns, a shadow carrying the smell of whiskey and gunpowder. Reed Lawson had returned. He'd been stewing for weeks in the hills north of the ranch, his pride festering into rage. He'd told himself Bennett didn't deserve what he had, the land, the herd, the woman, especially her, and tonight he'd make sure Cole Bennett lost it all. He struck a match, the flare of orange lighting his cruel grin. The flame caught on the edge of a haystack, just a spark at first. Then another. Soon the dry straw hissed, then roared to life. The wind carried the fire fast, licking up the barn walls like a living thing. Within minutes, the ranch began to glow red against the night. Lila stirred. Even in her sleep, she felt the change, the vibration under her fingertips, the sudden thump of panic from the horses, the strange, flickering light bleeding through the window. She sat upright, heart pounding. Cole hadn't woken yet. She touched his shoulder, shaking him. He blinked, dazed, then saw the reflection of flame on the wall. Dear God. They rushed to the window. The main barn was already engulfed, flames clawing toward the sky. The horses, Cole shouted, throwing on his boots. We've got to get them out. Lila was already moving. She grabbed her shawl, threw it over her head, and ran into the open yard. The night was chaos. Men shouting, buckets sloshing, sparks flying like angry fireflies. The smell of smoke burned her lungs. She could feel the thunder of hooves inside the barn, terrified animals trapped in a blaze they couldn't escape. She didn't hesitate. Cole saw her sprinting across the yard and shouted, "Lila!" No, but she was already gone and swallowed by the smoke. Inside the barn, the heat was unbearable. Flames climbed the walls, boards cracking and falling from above. Horses kicked at their stalls, eyes wild. Lila covered her mouth with her sleeve and moved fast, unbolting each door one by one. She patted the nearest mare's neck, whispering a silent calm. The animal bolted out through the smoke, followed by two others. Her vision blurred from the heat, her skin stinging from falling ash. Still, she pressed on. Then, she saw him. Reed Lawson stood near the back, the orange glow lighting his face. A pistol hung at his side. "Well, if it ain't the brave little bride," he sneered. "Didn't expect you to run into the fire for them beasts." She froze, backing away slowly. He stepped closer. "Tell me, does he even love you, or does he just pity you?" She shook her head, defiant, eyes full of fire. "Ah, that's right," he said mockingly. "You can't even hear me, can you?" He raised the gun, but before he could fire, a shout rang through the smoke. "Lawson!" Cole burst through the flames, shotgun in hand. The heat painted his face in gold and shadow. "Step away from her," Lawson laughed. "You should have let me ride out that night, Bennett. Now we're gonna finish this." The two men circled, fire crackling around them. Lila watched, terrified but frozen, her body caught between fear and fury. Then something inside her snapped. She spotted the hayloft ladder behind Lawson. The flames were climbing fast toward a hanging beam. With one quick motion, she grabbed a broken board and hurled it upward. The beam cracked, then fell. It crashed between the men, knocking Lawson backward. His gun flew from his hand and slid across the floor, stopping near Cole's boots. Cole didn't hesitate. He swung his shotgun stock hard, striking Lawson in the jaw. The man crumpled to the ground. "Get out!" Cole shouted, grabbing Lila's hand. She didn't hear him, but she saw his lips, his eyes, and she understood. Together they ran through the flames, coughing, shielding their faces as the barn collapsed behind them. By the time they stumbled into the yard, the men had formed a line of buckets, fighting to save what was left. The sky glowed red, smoke rolling into the stars. Cole pulled Lila close, holding her as if to make sure she was real. Her hair was streaked with ash, her cheeks blackened, but her eyes, those steady, fearless eyes, glimmered like blue fire. Martha ran up, sobbing. "You're both alive." The dawn broke soft and gold over the Bennett ranch. Rainwater shimmered in the furrows like tiny mirrors, and the smell of wet earth clung to everything. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered, broken fences, scattered tools, and weary men moving slow across the fields. Inside the house, it was still. Lila lay in the small guest room near the hearth wrapped in blankets. A faint bruise darkened her temple and her hair, still damp, spread like golden straw across the pillow. She stirred, eyes fluttering open to the sight of Cole Bennett sitting in the chair beside her bed. He hadn't slept, not a wink. His hat lay on the floor, his shirt still streaked with mud. When her eyes met his, he let out the breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "You gave me the worst scare of my life," he said softly, though he knew she couldn't hear the words. He reached out and took her hand instead. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, a language that needed no sound. Lila blinked, then slowly signed with trembling fingers. "The cattle?" Cole smiled faintly. "Safe," he mouthed. "You saved them all." Her lips curved into a small, tired smile, but her eyes shimmered with unspoken pain, not from her injuries, but from the stares she'd felt the night before. She remembered their laughter when she'd arrived, how they'd whispered behind her back, how they'd called her the deaf bride. Now those same men moved quietly around the ranch, whispering a different kind of word: respect. By noon, Lila insisted on getting up. Martha tried to stop her. "You need rest, honey. That fall rattled you good." But Lila only shook her head and signed. "Work helps." She moved through the house slowly, barefoot on the wooden floorboards, her dress freshly cleaned. Cole watched her from the porch as she began sweeping mud out of the doorway. Her movements graceful, sure, purposeful. He didn't stop her. He just leaned against the railing, arms folded, and wondered how he'd ever lived this long without her quiet strength beside him. One by one, the ranch hands approached her that afternoon, awkward. Hats in hand, eyes downcast, Luke was first. "Ma'am," he began, voice cracking a little. "I reckon I owe you more than an apology. I was wrong about you. We all were." She looked up, surprised by his sincerity. He fumbled for words, then pointed to his heart and signed, clumsy but clear, "Thank you." Her eyes softened. She nodded once, the corners of her lips lifting. Old Ben came next. He'd been working for Cole's family for 30 years and had seen every kind of trouble, but even he couldn't find the right words. He just took off his hat and gave her a slow, respectful bow. From that moment, something shifted on the Bennett ranch. The air felt lighter, the silence less lonely. That evening, Cole joined Lila by the corral. The sunset painted the sky in pink and amber, and the rebuilt fence cast long, clean shadows. He handed her a mug of hot coffee, steam curling into the cool air. She held it close, her hands brushing his for a moment, long enough to make his chest tighten. "Never seen anything like you," he said quietly. She tilted her head, watching his lips. He repeated it slowly so she could read. Her gaze softened. "I'm just not afraid to listen differently," she signed. Cole smiled. Maybe that's what this world needs. Someone who listens without needing words. A breeze moved through the pasture, rustling the grass. The cattle grazed calmly now, and the men worked together without complaint. Lila's eyes lingered on the horizon, peaceful, vast, endless. She thought of all the years she'd been made to feel small because of her silence, how people saw her as fragile or broken. But here, amid the dust and thunder of the West, she'd found something unexpected, a place that didn't just tolerate her quiet, but honored it. As the first stars appeared, Cole turned to her. "Lila." She met his gaze, her blue eyes reflecting the dying light. "I meant what I said last night," he continued, speaking slowly, each word deliberate. "You're better than all of them. Better than me, too." Her throat tightened. She reached up, touching his cheek gently, tracing his lips as he spoke the last words. "You saved my family." Then she signed one word, small and certain. "Ours." Cole's breath caught. In that moment, under the endless western sky, silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like a promise. The Bennett ranch came alive again with the sound of rebuilding. Hammers striking, ropes creaking, horses snorting in the corral. Yet amid the usual noise of work, there was something new. A quietness that wasn't born of silence, but respect. Ever since the storm, everyone looked at Lila differently. They no longer saw the deaf bride who had arrived in a dusty wagon. They saw the woman who had stood against a stampede with nothing but her courage. Still, Lila didn't crave attention. She woke early, worked beside Martha in the kitchen, mended torn saddlebags, and carried feed to the horses. But wherever she went, a strange hush followed, not out of pity but out of wonder. It was as if the whole ranch had begun to listen in a new way. That morning, Cole watched her from across the yard. She was brushing down a skittish mare, moving with calm, rhythmic motions. The horse snorted at first, but soon relaxed beneath her touch. Cole leaned on the fence post, arms folded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "She's got a gift," old Ben said, coming up beside him. "Don't need ears to understand hearts, I reckon." Cole nodded, his eyes never leaving her. "She listens deeper than any of us ever did." Later that day, Lila found herself surrounded by the ranch hands. Luke and 2 others were struggling to fix a broken gate hinge, shouting instructions over one another until it became a mess of confusion. She approached quietly, set down her basket, and tapped Luke's shoulder. He turned, embarrassed. "We're just, trying to make this thing fit," he said, gesturing helplessly. Lila smiled and motioned for the hammer. She knelt, studying the hinge, then pointed. 1 man here, 1 man there, then demonstrated how to lift it together in rhythm. They followed her gestures, working in sync. The hinge fit perfectly on the second try. Luke blinked, amazed. "Well, I'll be damned." She grinned and signed slowly. "Work smarter." He laughed. "Guess I better learn that sign." She nodded, motioning for him to repeat it. Awkward at first, he tried to mimic her movements. The others joined in, chuckling as they practiced. Soon the yard was filled with laughter. Not mockery this time, but warmth. Martha watched from the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "Would you look at that?" she whispered. "She's teaching them to speak her language." Cole, standing beside her, murmured, "Maybe she's teaching us all how to listen." As days passed, small miracles bloomed like wildflowers. The men began using simple signs for work: ready, stop, help. They found it useful during noisy cattle drives when shouting was pointless. Lila laughed silently when she saw them, her eyes glowing with pride. One afternoon, she sat by the corral fence, sketching letters in the dirt for Luke's little sister, Emma. The girl's pigtails bounced as she tried to mimic the signs Lila showed her. Horse. Son, friend. Cole approached quietly, his shadow falling across them. "Seems you've got yourself a student," he said. Lila looked up, smiling. "2," she signed, pointing at him. He chuckled. "I'm not as quick a learner as Emma." "You listen with your eyes," she replied, her hands moving gracefully. Cole crouched beside her, close enough to catch the scent of lavender soap in her hair. "Maybe that's how I started falling for you," he said softly. Her eyes flickered, shy, uncertain but bright. She looked away, tracing the sign for love in the dirt. The wind swept across the pasture just then, carrying the scent of rain and wild sage. Cole reached out, gently catching her hand before the wind erased her sign. He held her fingers in his, rough against soft, and whispered, "You don't have to write it for me to know." For a moment, silence wrapped around them like a tender blanket. No words, no sound, just 2 hearts speaking in a language older than speech itself. That evening, the ranch glowed golden in the fading sun. Lila stood on the porch, watching the horizon ripple with wind. The men were finishing their chores, laughing, signing, teasing one another. Even the cattle seemed calmer, as if they too felt the peace she brought. Cole came to stand beside her, his presence steady and warm. "Funny thing," he said. "For someone who can't hear, you sure brought a lot of harmony here." She smiled, eyes glistening, and signed slowly. "The wind has no voice either, but everyone listens to it." Cole looked out across the land, his land, her land now, and nodded. "Guess I finally understand." As the last light slipped below the hills, the whispering wind swept through the ranch again, gentle and full of promise, and in that quiet breeze, it seemed the world itself was learning to speak Lila's language. The wind had been restless all day. Even before the ranch hands noticed the dark smudge on the horizon, Lila May could feel it. It wasn't sound that warned her. It was the vibration beneath her feet, the way the ground seemed to hum. the uneasy shift of the horses in their stalls. A storm was coming. She stood on the porch, her shawl whipping around her shoulders, watching the clouds build like mountains in the west. The sky was bruised purple, heavy with the promise of rain and ruin. Cole came up behind her, a coil of rope slung over his shoulder. "Looks like trouble," he said, squinting at the distance. She turned, reading his lips. "Big storm," she signed, gesturing toward the sky. He nodded. "We'll get the herd into the lower pasture before it breaks." "Should be fine," but she frowned, pressing her palm to the porch railing. The wood vibrated, not from wind but from something deeper. She shook her head. "No," she signed. "It's stronger than it looks." Cole smiled reassuringly, though a small chill crept down his spine. "Don't worry, darlin'. We've handled worse." He kissed her forehead, then headed off toward the stables. By late afternoon, the ranch was a hive of motion. Men shouted orders, ropes cracked, and the smell of dust and electricity thickened the air. The cattle were uneasy, their low bellows echoing across the plains. Lila moved quickly through the house, securing windows, tying down shutters, and lighting a lantern just in case the skies went dark. Her hands trembled, not from fear but from urgency. She could feel the world tightening, coiling like a snake about to strike. When she stepped outside, the wind hit her full force. It howled through the grass, making it sway like ocean waves. The horses stamped nervously, and thunder flickered far away like silent lightning. She spotted Luke and Ben struggling with the gate. They were arguing, their mouths moving fast, but Lila didn't need words to know what was happening. She saw the panic in their gestures, the sloppy way they tied the ropes. The sky was boiling now, black clouds rolling like beasts across the heavens. Suddenly, the ground shook, not from thunder, from hooves, hundreds of them. Lila's eyes widened. The herd had broken free. The men hadn't heard it yet, but she felt it through the earth, a deep vibration traveling through her bones. She turned toward the open field and saw them, a wave of panicked cattle charging toward the ranch, driven wild by the rising wind. "Cole!" she screamed, though she couldn't hear her own voice. She waved her arms frantically, running toward the men. Luke frowned, confused. Then they heard it too, a low rumble growing louder. "Stampede!" Ben shouted. The men scattered. Dust exploded upward as the herd thundered closer, eyes wild, hooves tearing up the ground. Lila ran toward the corral, waving both arms high, trying to draw them away from the barn where the horses were trapped. The wind tore at her dress and the earth shook so violently she almost fell. Cole appeared on horseback, his face pale. "Lila!" She turned toward him, pointing to the herd, motioning frantically. A series of signs she'd never taught him, but that he somehow understood. "The fence. The horses, move them." Cole spurred his horse, racing toward the barn. Lila grabbed a fallen branch and waved it wildly, trying to steer the front of the herd away. The animals veered, just enough to spare the building, but the force of the wind threw her backward, tumbling into the dirt. She felt the ground tremble as hooves passed frighteningly close. Dust filled her lungs, then silence. When she opened her eyes, the herd had scattered into the lower field, the men chasing after them, the storm breaking loose in sheets of rain. Cole was off his horse in seconds, running to her. He dropped to his knees, pulling her up by the shoulders, mud streaking his face. "You all right?" he said, voice trembling. She blinked, dazed but alive. Her hands shook as she signed weakly. "I tried to tell them." Cole took her hand, gripping it tight. "I know," he said, pressing her palm to his heart. "You did." Behind them, lightning split the sky, illuminating the drenched land. The men gathered in silence, no laughter, no mocking, just respect written on their faces. Old Ben took off his hat. "If she hadn't seen it coming, we'd have lost everything," he muttered. Cole lifted Lila into his arms, carrying her toward the house as rain poured around them. Each step was heavy, but his heart was light, because in that moment, he knew without doubt that the woman everyone underestimated had just saved his ranch. The storm had only begun to show its teeth. Rain came down in thick, angry sheets, turning the dirt road to rivers of mud. Lightning cracked across the dark sky, bright as fire, followed by thunder that shook the hills. Out beyond the ranch, the herd was still running wild, hundreds of terrified cattle driven by wind, fear, and the rolling thunder that echoed like gunfire. Cole Bennett gripped the reins tight as his horse struggled through the downpour. "Keep 'em steady," he shouted to his men, though his voice was nearly lost to the storm. He had only one thought pounding in his mind. Lila. He'd left her near the porch, muddy and shaken, but alive. She'd seen the danger before anyone else, and without her, the ranch would already be gone. But the storm wasn't finished with them yet. Inside the barn, Lila stood trembling. The rain hammered against the roof, and the horses inside snorted and kicked in panic. She ran her hand along their necks, feeling their tremors, trying to calm them. Her heartbeat was wild, her breath shallow, but her movements were steady. She knew fear. She'd felt it her whole life, but she'd never let it rule her. She unlatched the stalls one by one, freeing the horses in case the barn collapsed. Her fingers worked fast, her mind focused. Outside, she saw flashes of lightning and dark shapes moving. Cole and his men, riding against the stampede, trying to turn the herd. A deep vibration rolled through the ground, stronger than before. Lila turned toward the sound she couldn't hear, the feeling of thunderous hooves drawing near again. Her eyes widened. The herd was circling back toward the ranch. They were coming straight for the barn. She grabbed a lantern and ran outside, the rain soaking her through in seconds. She waved the light high, running toward the fence line. Her feet slipped in the mud, but she didn't stop. Across the field, Cole saw her, a small figure in white against the darkness, holding up a flickering light. His heart nearly stopped. "Lila, no!" he shouted, spurring his horse forward. She couldn't hear him. She only saw the danger and did what her instincts told her. The first line of cattle came thundering toward the fence. The wood shook, splintered. One post snapped clean off. Lila dropped the lantern and began waving both arms, trying to drive them away from the barn. Her movements were wild, desperate, but there was a strange rhythm to them, almost like a dance, full of energy and will. For a heartbeat, the herd hesitated, the lead steer veering slightly at her motion. The rest followed, crashing through the far side of the pasture instead of the barn. She'd done it, but the force of wind and mud pulled her feet from under her, sending her tumbling down the slope. Cole reached her just in time. He leapt from his horse and slid across the muddy ground, catching her by the shoulders. She was dazed, her dress torn and covered in dirt. He pulled her close, shouting her name again and again, though she couldn't hear the sound of his voice. Her eyes fluttered open, and she reached up weakly, touching his face. Her fingers traced the word on his lips. Lila. She smiled faintly as if to say, "I'm here." He lifted her into his arms, cradling her against his chest as the rain poured harder. The storm raged around them, but the worst of the stampede had passed. Behind them, the ranch hands galloped up, drenched and exhausted. Old Ben dismounted, looking at the trampled fields and broken fences. "She turned 'em," he said in disbelief. By God, she turned 'em with nothing but her hands. Luke, the youngest, took off his hat, his expression full of shame. "We'd all be dead if not for her." Cole didn't answer. He just carried Lila toward the house, holding her like something sacred. Every step he took, he felt the thrum of her heartbeat against him, fragile but strong. When they reached the porch, Martha rushed out with a blanket. She's all right," Cole said, though his voice shook. "She's the reason we still have a ranch." Lila's eyes fluttered open again. She touched his hand weakly and signed, "Safe." Cole smiled through the rain. "Safe," he mouthed. She let out a long breath and rested her head against his chest. Outside, the storm began to break. The thunder faded into the distance, and a thin sliver of moonlight pierced through the clouds. The ranch was battered, the fences broken, but it still stood. And in Cole's arms, the woman who couldn't hear had become the one voice that saved them all. The first few days at the Bennett Ranch felt like stepping into another world, one alive with motion, rhythm and life that spoke not through words, but through touch, light, and movement. To Lila May, silence was never emptiness. It was color. It was feeling. The faint vibration of hooves as horses galloped past, the sway of wind through the wheat fields, the distant shimmer of sunlight bouncing off a metal trough. Each was a sound in her own quiet symphony. Yet in the house, things were different. The ranch hands spoke too fast, laughed too loud, and pointed when they thought she couldn't see. They were boys of the plains, rough, sunburned, good-hearted on most days, but ignorance often made cruelty look like humor. When Lila tried to help with chores, they found amusement in it. Once she carried a bucket of water to the horses, only for Luke, the youngest hand, to whistle sharply behind her. The sudden vibration startled her, and she dropped the bucket, spilling water across her dress. Laughter erupted. "Careful now," Luke said mockingly. "Maybe next time you'll hear the bucket fall before it does." Lila froze, her fingers tightening on the handle. Her cheeks burned, but she didn't cry. Instead, she bent down, refilled the bucket, and finished the task in silence. Cole saw the whole thing from the porch. That night, his voice was sharp as a whip. "If I ever see you mock her again," he told Luke, "you'll be out by sunrise." The boy mumbled an apology, but the damage was done. Lila saw Cole's anger, but not the words he spoke. She felt his tension, though, and later, when he came inside, she touched his arm gently and signed, "It's all right." Cole frowned. "No, it ain't." She tilted her head, reading his lips carefully. He slowed down, saying it again. "No, it ain't." Her smile was soft, the kind of smile that forgave more than words could. She signed back, "I am used to people not understanding." He looked at her for a long moment, his blue eyes troubled. "Then they'll learn," he said firmly, "starting with me." The next morning, Cole surprised her. He had drawn shapes and letters in the dirt outside the barn, the alphabet written with careful precision. When she walked up, he handed her a small stick and motioned for her to teach him. Lila blinked in surprise, then smiled, wide and genuine. She knelt beside him and began to draw signs next to each letter, her delicate hands moving gracefully through the air. He mimicked her gestures, clumsy but determined. She laughed, a silent laugh, her shoulders shaking, eyes bright with joy. Cole grinned, scratching his head. "Well," he said, "guess I ain't much of a student, but I'll learn if it takes me all year." From that moment, a quiet bond began to form, one deeper than sound. In the evenings, when the sun painted the land in fire and gold, Lila would stand on the porch and watch the horses run across the fields. Cole would often join her, leaning on the railing, saying little. She'd place her hand on the wood and feel the faint tremor of his voice when he spoke. It wasn't about hearing. It was about sensing, being present in the same silence together. Martha, Cole's sister, noticed the change. She saw how Lila's presence softened Cole's edges, how his temper cooled, how the house felt warmer even in quiet. Martha began to speak slower, clearer, learning to mouth her words for Lila's understanding. Soon the cook and stable boy followed her lead. It was a small thing, but it meant everything. Still, not everyone changed. At night, when the men gathered by the fire, Luke would sometimes mutter under his breath. "He's wasting his time," he'd say. "How's a deaf woman going to raise kids, run a ranch, or call for help when there's trouble?" They didn't know that Lila could see their mouths move through the window. And she did not cry. She simply looked out into the dark horizon, tracing the outline of the mountains, her thoughts steady as the stars. She knew the West was hard for men, harder for women, and nearly impossible for someone like her. But she'd spent her whole life being underestimated. The silence wasn't her weakness. It was her weapon, and one day she would make them see that. The days rolled by like the slow turning of wagon wheels, the Bennett Ranch alive with movement, noise, and sun. But to Lila May, the world was not noise. It was rhythm. Every footstep on the porch, every gust of wind against the shutters, every heartbeat beneath her fingertips. She felt it all. And though others thought her world empty, hers was full of sensations the hearing could never notice. Cole watched her closely now, not as a man watches a fragile thing, but as one trying to understand a mystery. Every morning, before dawn, Lila rose to feed the chickens and tend to the garden. She moved quietly, gracefully, her bare feet brushing the earth like she belonged to it. The ranch hands sometimes stopped their work just to watch, though they'd never admit it aloud. One morning, as she carried a basket of eggs to the kitchen, Cole stepped out of the barn. "You don't have to do all this," he said softly, knowing she might not catch the words. "You're my wife, not my ranch hand." She smiled faintly, reading his lips. Her hands moved in reply. "Your home is mine now. I take care of what I love." Cole froze. Her signing was graceful, like poetry in motion. He understood just enough to grasp the meaning, and something in his chest shifted, a weight he didn't know he'd been carrying. He reached for her hand, tracing a single word into her palm. "Thank you." She understood. As summer deepened, the ranch grew busier. Calves were born, fences needed mending, and storms gathered in the distance. One afternoon, Cole was repairing a gate when he heard commotion near the stables. Old Ben, the senior ranch hand, came running. "It's the foal, boss." The mare dropped her early. "The little one ain't breathing right." Cole ran, boots pounding against the dirt. Inside the stable, the mare was pacing anxiously and a small, limp foal lay in the straw. The other men stood uncertainly, muttering that it was hopeless. Then Lila appeared in the doorway. She didn't ask questions. She didn't speak. She simply knelt beside the foal, her face calm and focused. She placed her palms gently against its small chest, feeling for life. Nothing. Then she shifted her hands, pressing lightly, counting in her mind to 1, 2, 3, breathing softly against its muzzle, not giving up. Cole watched silently, the others holding their breath. Minutes passed. Then suddenly, in a tiny movement, the foal's chest rose. Its legs twitched weakly. A collective gasp filled the stable. The mare nickered softly, nosing her newborn, and Lila smiled through tears, resting her forehead against the colt's wet mane. Cole's throat tightened. He stepped forward, his voice low and reverent. "You did it, darlin'." She looked up at him, eyes glistening, and signed a single word: "Alive." The men exchanged glances, not mocking this time, but humbled. The woman they'd laughed at had just brought life back into the barn. That evening, the ranch gathered for supper. No one dared joke about her anymore. Even Luke, usually quick with a cruel remark, kept his head down. Lila sat beside Cole, unaware of the weight her actions carried. She just smiled quietly, enjoying the peace of the moment. Cole, though, couldn't stop thinking about what he'd seen, how her hands, the same hands that spoke without sound, could coax life where there had been none. Later, when the stars rose and the ranch fell still, he found her sitting by the corral, watching the horses under the moonlight. He joined her without a word. For a while, they just sat there, the night humming around them, crickets, the rustle of the grass, the low snort of a stallion nearby. Lila's gaze was far away. Cole finally spoke. "I used to think listening meant hearing," he said. "But you listen with your hands, your eyes, your heart. You see things I never even noticed." She turned toward him, reading his lips carefully. When she understood, her expression softened and she reached for his hand. Placing it against her chest, she signed slowly. "You can hear too, if you try." He nodded, understanding, not just the words but the meaning behind them. From that night on, Cole began to see differently. He started noticing the tremor of hooves before he heard them, the flicker of shadow before thunder rolled, the gentle pulse of the earth under his boots. Through Lila's silence, he began to truly listen, and though she could not hear his voice, she knew deep down that something in him was beginning to change, that love had started speaking in a language far beyond words. The sun hung low over Silver Creek, a frontier town known for its dust, whiskey, and gossip. Saturday mornings usually meant poker, trading, and the sound of boots on wooden sidewalk. But today, the town had something far more interesting to whisper about. A wedding, and not just any wedding. A wedding between Cole Bennett, the most respected rancher in the valley, and a woman no one had ever seen before. The news had spread like wildfire since dawn. Shopkeepers leaned out their doors, women in calico dresses gathered near the church fence, and ranch hands took their hats off to swat flies while pretending not to stare down Main Street. Then the stagecoach came. It rumbled in a cloud of gold-colored dust, wheels squealing as it pulled to a stop in front of the small white church. The driver jumped down, wiping sweat from his brow, and opened the door. Out stepped a woman dressed in white lace and pale blue ribbons, her gown simple but elegant. Her hair, the color of autumn wheat, was pinned neatly beneath a small veil. The town went silent for a breath as she looked around, and her eyes wide, uncertain, searching. Then someone whispered, "That's her, the bride." The woman's name was Lila Mae Carter. She turned toward the driver, her lips moving, but no words came. Instead, she pointed to her suitcase. The man nodded awkwardly, realizing she hadn't heard him ask if she needed help. It didn't take long for the crowd to notice. "She's deaf," murmured a woman behind the fence. "Poor thing can't even hear her own wedding bells." A few chuckles followed, sharp and mean, the kind that cut deeper than a knife. Lila didn't react. She didn't need to hear laughter to know it was there. She'd grown up with the feel of mockery, the way eyes lingered, the way mouths curved into cruel shapes. She held her head high, clutching the small bouquet of wildflowers she'd picked that morning, and walked toward the church doors. Inside, Cole Bennett stood near the altar, tall and broad-shouldered, his hat in hand. His weathered face softened the moment he saw her. He'd written to her for months, each letter filled with the plain honesty of a man who'd known both loss and loneliness. She had answered in neat, careful handwriting, her words full of warmth and courage. When he learned she was deaf, it hadn't changed a thing. If anything, it deepened his admiration. Now as she approached, his heart thudded like a hammer. The preacher, old Reverend Amos, shifted uncomfortably. "You sure you want to go through with this, Cole?" He muttered. "A man needs a wife who can, talk to him." Cole looked at him squarely. "I reckon a man needs a wife who can understand him. There's a difference." The church doors opened again and the crowd outside pressed closer, whispering and laughing. Lila stood at the aisle's edge, sunlight streaming behind her like a halo. She looked at Cole, steady, kind, familiar from the letters that had carried his heart across the miles. He reached out a hand. She took it, trembling slightly. The preacher cleared his throat and began the ceremony, stumbling over his words as he tried to explain each part to her. Cole gently guided Lila's hand, showing her when to nod, when to smile. He spoke his vows slowly, looking directly into her eyes. "I promise to stand by you, come storm or sun," he said, "to keep you safe and to love you, and with words or without." The words carried through the open doors and out to the onlookers. A hush fell. Even the ones who'd laughed a minute ago went quiet. There was something in Cole's voice, something that made the jokes die in their throats. Lila couldn't hear his vow, but she saw the shape of his words and felt their weight. Her eyes shimmered. When the preacher signaled her turn, she placed her hand over Cole's heart and mouthed her own promise. "I will love you, even in silence." The preacher pronounced them husband and wife. As Cole kissed her softly, the crowd shifted uncomfortably. The men took off their hats. The women stopped whispering. Outside, the church bell began to ring, its sound echoing down the street. Lila couldn't hear it, but she felt the vibration in the air, in the ground, even in Cole's chest as he held her close. For the first time, she smiled, not shyly but proudly, because though the world mocked her silence, she'd found the one man who heard her heart louder than any bell in Silver Creek. The afternoon sun blazed over Silver Creek as the wedding party stepped out of the church. The crowd that had gathered on the dusty street clapped politely, but not kindly. It wasn't the sound of celebration. It was the sound of curiosity. Cole Bennett, tall and composed, helped his new bride down the wooden steps. Lila's lace dress fluttered in the warm breeze, her bouquet of wildflowers trembling slightly in her hand. She couldn't hear the murmurs, but she could feel the tension in the air. The way faces turned quickly when she looked their way. The tight-lipped smiles, the sidelong glances. "Poor girl," someone whispered. "What kind of life can a deaf woman give a rancher?" Another voice snickered. Guess Bennett couldn't find anyone who'd talk back. A few ranch hands laughed out loud. Cole's jaw tightened. He guided Lila toward the waiting wagon, his hand steady on her back, but his eyes burned with quiet anger. Lila looked up at him, searching his face. She saw the tension there, the flicker of something he tried to hide. She always knew when people laughed. She didn't need to hear it. The world spoke in vibrations, in the weight of air, in the cruel twist of a smile. As the wagon rolled away, she looked back once more at the town, at the faces half hidden behind fans and hats. Her heart ached, but she refused to let it show. That evening, the Bennett ranch glowed golden in the setting sun. The sprawling land stretched for miles, dotted with horses and grazing cattle. It was beautiful. The kind of place that promised peace, if only it were not shadowed by gossip. Inside the ranch house, Cole's sister Martha had prepared a small supper to welcome the new bride. She greeted Lila with a nervous smile and a wave. "Welcome, dear," she said gently, exaggerating her lips so Lila could read them. Lila smiled gratefully, mouthing a soft, "Thank you." Martha guided her to the table. The long wooden surface gleamed under the lantern light, filled with cornbread, roast chicken, and beans. Lila sat quietly, folding her hands as Cole took his seat beside her. A few ranch hands were there too, old Ben, young Luke, and a few others who worked the cattle. They meant well enough most days, but whiskey and small minds had a way of making cruel tongues wag. Luke leaned toward Ben, smirking. Reckon she'll hear you if you drop your fork? Ben chuckled. Maybe she's got special ears. Like a dog. Cole slammed his cup down so hard the table rattled. The men froze. He glared at them, his voice low but steady. You talk like that again and you'll be finding work at the next ranch over. Understand? The laughter died. The air thickened. Lila watched him, unsure what had been said, but she sensed the shift, the sudden silence that filled the room. Her eyes darted between the men, then to Cole. He turned toward her, softening instantly, and signed the few words he'd learned. All right, she smiled faintly, nodding though she knew it wasn't. After supper, she stepped outside. The sky was painted in streaks of pink and violet, and the first stars began to shimmer. She breathed in the scent of sagebrush and horses, the cool air brushing against her cheeks. Cole joined her a moment later. You like it here? He asked, his voice gentle even though he knew she couldn't hear. She turned to him, studying his lips, then nodded. Her fingers moved slowly as she signed. Beautiful, he smiled. You are too. Her cheeks flushed, but her eyes sparkled with shy happiness. For the first time since she arrived, she felt a small seed of hope take root. But behind them, through the open window, she caught sight of Luke and Ben again, whispering and laughing. She couldn't hear their words, but she saw their mouths move, saw her name form on their lips. Her heart sank. The laughter followed her into her dreams that night, a laughter she could not hear but could never escape. When morning came, she rose before dawn. The house was quiet except for the creak of the floorboards. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped outside to greet the sunrise. The world was silent, but in that silence, she found comfort. The rustle of wind through the grass, the movement of horses, the vibration of hooves in the earth. She could feel it all. Lila smiled softly to herself. The world did not need to be heard to be beautiful, and though the town mocked her, though the ranch hands whispered behind her back, she knew one truth already. Her silence would one day speak louder than their laughter.